So how did you find that activity? What did you see as the commonality of change that came out of that for you guys?
It was good. We both agreed on the things that, you know, if they were to change, that would be, yeah, quite frustrating. We both agreed on each other's kind of points, what we said.
Yeah. And did you identify what was it about the change that was so difficult?
I think, well, because one of mine was, if, say, you came into my house and said, right, because you have to take your shoes off as soon as you walk in, and if you said, right, everyone can leave their shoes on now, immediately my brain would just like it would just be so frustrating that I'd really find that hard to cope with. Yeah, so yeah.
So for that one, is that about the change, or is that about the standards, or is that
That's more about cleanliness and hygiene. Yeah, so that's more about, yeah, so it's not, yeah.
So that one is a conflict with values or principles that you, so therefore that transition makes that even more difficult. So that's a really important thing to note, that actually for some people the change could conflict with something that's really important for them as well. And so just recognizing that sometimes if we make a change at work, that might be the case too. Let's have a look at some of the other groups. Thank you for sharing that, Hannah. That's really helpful. Michael, what about your group? There were 3 of you, so hopefully you've got a chance to all mention it. But were there any issues around the change that you kind of agreed on? So not necessarily so much exactly what your changes were, but what was it that would have been difficult about those changes?
Sorry, is that our group?
Yeah, that's Michael, Jacqueline, and Hayden. Yeah.
Well, some of the things we agreed on was about the difficulty we might find hard with change. Is one of them is if it affects us negatively. Because mine for work was if my hours were reduced, then that change would then have a negative effect on myself. So then you wouldn't want that type of change. And then also is if a change is made, I think you would find it hard if the change doesn't seem productive, if the change doesn't seem to actually make this thing worse and it's not really sensible, then to sort of, then you'd find it hard to go with the change because then it conflicts because you kind of feel it's not a positive change.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that you've borne out there. One is when it has a personal impact. So like someone's hours changing will make a difference to their salary. That can have all sorts of implications for that individual. And the second one you've talked about there is then, am I seeing the impact of change as well? Yeah, okay. Michael, was there anything else you would add to that, or has Jacqueline covered the key points from your group?
Yeah, to be honest, they were the main key points. It was about like how the negative effects and all that. So yeah, she covered pretty much all of it.
Okay, great.
And then, one thing we did touch on as well is different individuals might react differently, because I think your personality has something to do with it as well. I mean, if you're more, I suppose, adventurous, risk-taking, like change, you'll be more prone to be happy to try that new experience if you like new things. Whereas if your personality was more, no, I like to do the same thing every day at a certain time, know in advance, then I think you'll be a lot more reserved to go along with the change.
Yes, and there's all sorts of complexities listed in that. So actually it can depend on who's leading the change. If I trust this person, if I've been on a journey before with this person through change, therefore I can trust it because it did turn out okay. Whereas if someone who's doing it that I don't really like, then or we've been there before and it didn't go very well, all those factors can come into it, as well as you say, someone's personality. And it could also depend on people's home situations. If you've had to go through a lot of change at home and then work changes, at least work was safe for me because I knew that remained the same. Whereas for other people, maybe where home is completely normal and lots of good routines, you can perhaps cope with a little change at work. So you're right, there can be all sorts of factors why people react differently. The other group was Bryony and Chelsea. I don't think we've covered your group yet. So anything from your group around why it was hard to change? Both of you waiting for the other one to decide. Now you've both unmuted, so you'll both speak at the same time, so it's great. So Bryony, you go first, and then Chelsea can add anything if there's anything else to add.
We said like with the home one, there wasn't anything too specific, but like just changing where anything is, like rearranging things. Because I know like with me, everything sort of has a place in the house. I know where everything is. So if someone was to come and like rearrange it and move it all around, that would throw me a lot.
And did you identify what it is about that would be so hard?
No, I think just not knowing where things are, like you said earlier, going to like a cupboard and being like, oh no, it's in this one now. I think that would just throw me a bit.
I think as well, we make our home how we like it. Like I actually brought that up. I said the one thing for home would be if they came in and rearranged all my furniture. A lot to do with, I've only recently rearranged my whole flat to just how I like it. And I actually assessed each room of, actually that could move there and it'd be a lot better and create more space. So yeah, if someone came in and did that or made the room not nice.
Yeah. And there is a sense in these, isn't it? We feel a bit out of control as well. Hang on, I would have liked to have said where that was gone, and I quite liked it where it was, either the squash cupboard or where your furniture is, isn't it? So we feel this sense of it being taken away from us. Chelsea, was anything to add to what Bryony's already said?
Yeah, mine also was if like I was told not to work out anymore, perhaps from home, that I'd find that very difficult because it takes away the person that you are. And then the things being moved is probably also like I'm very systematic and where everything goes, everything has a place. So if you move it, it would irritate me. And then with work, it would be if we were told not to teach classes anymore, I'd probably leave my job.
Yeah. So there's this sense that from what you're talking about there, often it's not the bit that sits on the surface. It's the bit underneath. So you talked about not to work out. It's not so much it is the telling you not to work out, but it's the implication of that, because that's part of who you are. So when you see someone's maybe job title or job role being changed, for example, this would be an equivalent at work, it's not so much the job title or role being changed, it's the value the person has underneath of that. You take that role away. If you calling me lead barista, I'm now just known as a barista. It's only one word, the word lead, but it's the status someone feels is being taken from them that sits beneath it. So it's being aware that there are often things beneath. So Jacqueline mentioned earlier, we're just going to reduce your hours by a couple of hours, but that's just reducing your hours by a couple of hours. But the implication beneath is what the person then becomes concerned about. So it's just being aware of these things. So hopefully I've not caused any trauma. You're not all now suddenly rushing for your cupboards to check I've not done it. You're not now suddenly rushing to the front door and seeing if people are now being allowed to walk through the house with muddy boots. So you can do a bit of a breathe now. We're not going to do that. It was just to help you identify that actually these are some of the thoughts and feelings people have. And if we can identify ourselves, oh yeah, I would find that a bit difficult, then we can begin to see it from their perspective when we're leading change. And we can put some things in place to try and help them understand the reason for change and how certain things can be made safer. And part of that is also about exploring with them the implications for change. Okay, going to share with you the screen again. And for those who are now watching this on record, just apologies, we missed the first part of the video. It's because I forgot to press record. And so you've come in after the bit where we've just looked at metathesiophobia, is the fear of change, and we've explored how it's the transition, the routine we get used to, moving to a different part of the brain can become difficult. So the change, in some ways, can be an issue, but it isn't just the change. It's about the transition. The thing we don't like is the movement from one thing to another. That having been said, of course, if it's something really important to you, e.g. take your shoes off when you come in the house, or this is where this piece of furniture goes for a good reason, it can actually be the change itself that some people find difficult. But on the whole, it's the movement of one thing to another that people find difficult. Now, a couple of bits of theory just to run through with you. One piece of theory to be aware of, again, there's a little bit more info of this on your online part of your reading, is the Kubler-Ross curve. Now, the Kubler-Ross curve was originally devised to help people understand loss and bereavement. So when someone goes through a death, or when somebody, when you perhaps separate from someone, or when a friendship breaks down, it's this sense of loss. And these guys, Kubler and Ross, came up with a process that they think people go through. Now, it isn't as simple as this, because I think for some people it goes up and down through a series of these. But basically, they say when there's something first happens, there can be this sense of denial. Surely not. If somebody suddenly dies, for example, this, no, surely not. A sense of denial that could even possibly happen. But this could also be the case when you're bringing in change. No, surely you can't change the way we fill in Form 901. Surely not. We've always done Form 901. Surely you can't. Almost this sense of denial. Then it can move into a sense of frustration. And for some also then this sense of depression, this sense of loss, this sense of, I can't believe that this has happened, and this sense of low from it. What you'll then find is that people may begin to experiment with the future of what it could look like. And then there is this sense of decision. Okay, so I am going to engage in this, and I am going to be part of a new future moving forward. Now, as I say, for bereavement, it's not that every stage is almost like an exact amount, like you can see on this graph. And there can be a sense that some people might move between denial, frustration, depression, and back again. And they can move through a range of those at one time. And you can equally see that with change sometimes as well. They might deny it, they might be frustrated, then they might be really sad, and then they might kick back into frustration and push back against the change that they want to happen. But in most cases, there is this sense then of, okay, so maybe I could explore what this could like. A sense of accepting that this is a new reality that I'm going to have to address. Again, whether that's bereavement, whether that's a parting of friends, or whether that is some change that's going to happen. And then at some point, a decision to engage with a new future. Whether that's, okay, so I am going to be part of this, or whether that's in the case for some people of, that's it. I'm going to leave this job then, because changing Forms 901, I am not doing this job if we're going to do this form differently. Now, probably you wouldn't leave job just because of Form 901. It might be because there is no Form 901, in case any of you are wondering what Form 901 should we be filling in. But what it is a sense for people, maybe this is the phrase, the straw that breaks the camel's back, the last bit of too much change for me. Or it's more likely to be that there's a significant change that's changed then the job or the way they see the job. So Chelsea mentioned earlier, if you told me we were no longer going to run classes, I would change my job, because for Chelsea, that's a key part of what she loves doing about her job, and that change is too much. And therefore, although Chelsea might leave and then choose some new change, it's her choice of change as opposed to a change being forced on her, or she can choose to go somewhere where she could then continue to do the thing that she loves to do. So the Kubler-Ross curve, originally designed for people going through bereavement, but can happen for those who are going through change. And you can see at the very bottom row of this, that if you're working with people with change and you see some frustration or you see some depression, see the very bottom row are some of the key things that if you're working with someone, these are the sorts of things that you need to then do, excuse me, you need to then do to make sure that you can help them through that period. So during a period of denial, it is about making sure you're communicating information. During this period of frustration and depression, it's about watching, listening, and supporting. If you try and push people through too quickly whilst they're frustrated and depressed, you'll get kickback. You might get even further denial, and it actually could be quite damaging in terms of your relationship. And then in terms of when they begin to experiment, you give them time to explore and test it. You support them through that position, help them with any new things that they need to learn. And then as they begin to become involved in this new change, again, that approach then is to celebrate that with them. Obviously not bring out party poppers and bunting, but there's just sense of, hey, this is great, well done. I'm so glad you've been able to be involved in this. So it's being aware of that one's important. But another really important one, which is mentioned, it is something that you may be asked about in your kind of endpoint assessment. And so having an awareness of this one is quite important. And this is the Bridges transition model. It was developed by Mr. Bridges. And ironically, of course, it is about bridging and taking people through change, but that isn't why it's called Bridges. And he says there are 3 parts to transition through change. He said, first of all, there's this ending, this losing, this letting go. The midpoint is a neutral zone, and the end point is this sense of new beginning. And so he said, what you'll see first of all when you bring in some change in this first part is you'll see the fear, the denial, the anger, the loss, the sadness, the disorientation, the frustration, the uncertainty. You'll see a range of those feelings. And the purple bit at the bottom of this diagram, he said it's then the approach that you need to have to help people through this are accepting their emotions. Now, for those of you who've done training with me before, when we talk about our emotions, when we talk about people and dealing with people, and the work from Steve Peters on chimp paradox, what he says is you've got part of your brain, the emotional part, which he calls your chimp. And when that emotional part senses fear or worry, it will get agitated. And he said the key thing in dealing with people when they are agitated is to accept their emotions, to accept the feelings they're going through. So if you think about it, if someone's getting agitated and you just tell them to calm down, that really doesn't help. You've probably seen that if you've ever told someone to calm down. They don't, they get more agitated. Or if someone's ever told you to calm down, you just say, I'm not going to calm down because I'm really cross. Actually, what they need to hear is, I can see this is really frustrating for you. You need to acknowledge those emotions. And that helps them through this part of transition because they can see that you understand it's difficult. Allow them time to accept it, allow them time to talk about their feelings, show authentic empathy. So what we must avoid is this, I'm currently giving you 10 minutes of empathy just so you calm down and we can move on with this. That they will sense that lack of authenticity. It has to be tapping into I'm going to move your furniture around, I'm going to walk through your house with dirty shoes, I'm gonna change your I'm gonna take away your classes at work. It's tapping into that sense that that's how it feels for them. It's the equivalent of dirty shoes through the house, moving the furniture, changing the cupboards, taking away the classes for them. And so that's how they're feeling. That's how raw it feels for them. And the key thing about this is about open communication, trying to help them understand, to listen to them, to understand their position, but also being able to then point them and explain why the change is being made. It's a really key thing, the why of the change, not necessarily the what's of the change. Really important. Then they'll move through to a neutral zone. And what you'll find then is possibly a sense of resentment. You could get some low morale, lack of productivity. You could get anxiety about their role and status. Now, when we come at the end of this session to look at Noster, you'll see anxiety is one of the emotions, some of the behaviors that you might see. And that will help us with that diagram. You'll be able to see, well, what causes anxiety and how you can help it. So again, another teaser there. This diagram is coming, this great diagram of help. But you'll see these things. You might even see some skepticism. Oh, is this going to work? Because it didn't work last time so-and-so brought in a change. And this is this neutral zone. Again, the purple tells you what you need to be providing at this point. It's about giving direction, feedback, short-term goals and wins. So for some people, they see the change as really huge. And so they're used to this comfort zone, and you're trying to push them right out of their comfort zone. So the trick there is to help them work in their golden zone. So the golden zone, so here's your comfort zone, this big. The golden zone is just this little bit bigger, the bit just outside their comfort zone. Because at the moment, they're seeing this bit right out here. The jump's too big from where I'm currently. So give them a little bit. Look, I know you're going to find this difficult, so why don't you just try this little bit? A tiny change. I know you're used to doing it this way, so let's have this period of transition. Why don't you just try this bit of it and see how that goes today? Don't worry about the rest, just do this little bit. And then they get used to that. So what happens is their comfort zone then stretches to that part. So then you give them the next little bit just outside their comfort zone. And gradually what happens is they gradually move to that position. So it's about short-term goals, short-term wins, and where you can encourage and boost their morale. And then he says the third part is the sense of, okay, so it is a new beginning. You'll find some higher energy because actually there's a purpose, everybody working towards something, and there's a sense of commitment to it. And what he says, Bridges, is link that to a personal goal, to organization objectives, celebrate and reward. And it's all about saying how, yeah, this is what I want you to work on. This is how it helps towards what we're currently doing as a company, and this sense of celebration and reward as part of it. So in some ways that links to that last part, if you remember, from the Kubler-Ross curve as well. So a number of these will overlap in some of their thinking. So that's the Bridges transition model. So now it's a case for you of you thinking, so on the bottom of page 2 of your handout, I want you just to look, first of all, I'm going to pop you into some breakout rooms again just to talk about it. But first of all, I want you to look at the bottom of page 2 of your handout. You'll see that there is a list of the 3 sections of Bridges and the kind of key words that were in there. So you'll see, when something is ending, you've got the fear, the denial, the anger, loss. What I want you to do is think about maybe change that you've been through. And you will have been through a lot in the last 12 to 18 months with the COVID changes. Think about some of the things that maybe have had to change for you, and just identify with, sort of ticks maybe, which ones did you experience in each of those columns? Which ones did you experience in ending? Which ones did you experience during that neutral point? And which ones did you experience in new beginning? Now, you might not necessarily have experienced them all, but can you see? So think about a time of change. It could be something as simple as new routines due to COVID. It could be something else. Just spend a minute just jotting ticks, crosses, notes. And in a minute, I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms just to talk about which of these did you see and experience, and see if there's any commonality. Or it could be you get together and you go, no, Bridges is rubbish. Didn't feel any of that. And remember, of course, that actually we all experience change in a different way. And it could be that the change wasn't too huge for you or too traumatic. Jacqueline, you look poised to ask me a question then.
Yeah, I think all of this depends on if it's a really positive change and it's a positive change for yourself, and it's and you can see the change is positive, then it's hard. I think you'll get a couple of those. Like you might get a bit apprehensive about everything that you've got to do or learn or getting to know the procedure. But I think a lot of it you wouldn't get. You'll get obviously the new beginning bit.
Yes, yeah, and you're right, and that can be part of your discussion in there. And one of the things that we'll talk about when you come back, that even good change, the transition can feel hard. And so when we come back, I'll talk about, and remind me to this when we come back, we'll talk about good changes. So for example, somebody who decides I'm going to move in with my partner, or I'm going to get married to my partner, that's a good change. But there still will be some transition that may be difficult. Yeah. So you're right. The reason for change, and I talk to people about this balance scale. Reason for change is greater than your reason not to. And that can make a real difference to you. So you'll know, because I think I've said this 2 years ago, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The reason for I had to change what I was eating, because if I didn't, it would seriously affect my health. It already was affected, clearly, the fact that I had type 2. But that reason of giving up sweets, chocolate, Chelsea buns, it was greater to do that. It was really hard, that change. I love Chelsea buns and I love Bakewell tarts. But the reason for cutting them out was greater. So sometimes that again can make the difference. Our reason for change can be greater, will help us through that transition of change. Yeah. Okay, so just going to pop you into those breakout rooms then, if that's okay with everyone. I'm just going to keep you in the same one as last time for this time. I'm just going to give you, kind of 3 minutes just to chat about what did you notice? Did you spot any of those bridges? You may have similar discussion that Jacqueline's just mentioned as well, but what ones did you see were for you in the change from Bridges model? Okay, rooms are open, 3 minutes, and I'll see you back here shortly.
Hiya.
You're the winners, the first back. Of course, that does mean, though, that I get to ask you the question straight away. So, so how did we find that? Were there any common ones that you did experience around Bridges in your transition? So, Jem, if we start with you from your couple, were there any ones that you both experienced?
Yeah, there was quite a few. Again, we both had different scenarios, but there was like the fear, the uncertainty, and like the sadness of like new changes coming into place.
Yeah.
And like it's mainly like when things are ending, it's like the anxiety and like what's going to happen next. And then obviously in the new beginnings part, it was like you're starting to open up to learn again. So there's quite a few that we kind of related on.
Yeah, great. Anything else to add to that one, Hannah?
No, yeah, it was just because recently we've had I suppose it's a good change, because in April last year, Mosaic came and took over from the management that we had. So our management pulled out, and they were a lovely team. So we were quite attached to them. But, and when they told us that they were coming out, then definitely felt fear, loss, disorientation, uncertainty, not knowing what was going to happen. And also resentment. The team, there was 3 of us that were permanent staff that we felt resentment, low morale, anxiety about status, and skepticism about, what was going to happen. So those were things that there was low morale. We felt exactly those things. And then obviously now, they've come in at Mosaic, and, they're absolutely lovely. It's been wonderful, and there is that high energy. I'm sat here right now, and that's because Mosaic have put me here on this course today, so that's really good. It's really positive, and open to learn, and also commitment. We have lost one of our team, so obviously her commitment she's drawn back and gone somewhere else and decided, no, this isn't for me. But then a couple of us have stayed on, and and it has made us more committed, so it's
So you've
definitely
experienced a complete change through, haven't you? And in one sense, you've seen through that. When you go through a change, whether that's good or bad, you experience the emotions, but you can also see what makes the difference. So for you, it's unpicking, going through those zones. What was it that Mosaic did that then turned this huge senses of anxiety, fear, possibly also then mixed with all that's going on out there in the COVID world and people with jobs, all that stuff comes into play, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then they did something that made that transition easier. So it's on those bits, isn't it? And so what would you say were the 1 or 2 key things that helped you through Bridges transition that you experienced?
When they came, obviously, we kept our roles. Our roles weren't changed. They were just really understanding of, what we did in our positions to begin with. And there has been changes. There's been huge changes in the way it's been run, but we can see that it's for the better. So I suppose it's like what you said before, that it's just ever so slightly happening, and getting us used to it. And obviously, and I think maybe the COVID times have helped, because we've been able to kind of talk over Zoom when there's not been any guests there, for these changes to really happen when we've not been running properly. I think it would have been more difficult if we'd have been had our minds in a busy job and transitioning at the same time. That might have felt quite a lot on, but because we were just concentrating on transitioning into this new company, then that was quite easy. So that's positive, really, that we had that time.
So what you've got there, you've got some really key bits around communication. You also talked about some bits staying the same, so your roles staying the same at first and then moving to transition. And it's interesting, we're going to look at another theory in a moment, the nudge theory, and you've indicated an element of that where some little bits just get nudged gently and be a key player as part of that. So thank you for mentioning those as well. It's really helpful. Let's take another group. So Hayden, do you want to speak on behalf of your group? Were there any key elements that your team saw?
Well, we all had different ones to begin with. Do you want me to walk through my personal one?
No, it's really just whether there are any common themes. And you're saying actually for you guys, you experienced different feelings. So was that linked to what Jacqueline was saying beforehand around depending on people's situation, people's attitude? Did you discuss at all why you might have had different ones?
No, I think we all had different examples, but as a whole, I think it was all roughly like the same kind of things we had ticked off, with just the uncertainty with with COVID, I think it was, we pretty much all used at the very beginning, and then coming back towards reopening again, you had all like the low morale, or kind of just with like all the new rules and having to get used to doing those again. And then when we started, we were all a bit more like open to learning and stuff like that again. So we're all very similar on that.
Yeah,
that side of things, but our examples were all different.
Yeah, your examples are different, but it's interesting, isn't it? The situations were different, but actually some of those thoughts and feelings were overlapped and were similar. And so in some ways, of course, Bridget's example can be seen to be true from your experiences. 3 different people, 3 different settings, 3 different scenarios, and yet some of those emotions are the same. So thank you for sharing that, Hayden. Bryony, should we take it from your pair? Again, were there any common feelings from the Bridges model that you experienced?
We kind of just said the same, as it like we can see how different scenarios you'd feel all of them depending on what the change was.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did have quite a few the same, but because our situations were different, it depends what sort of level the change is on, I think, as to how many you would sort of feel in each stage.
Yeah. So if it's something really significant, you might have felt more of them.
Yeah.
Again, as Jacqueline has mentioned earlier, it depends on your situation, doesn't it? Yeah,
I think so.
Great, thank you. So I said just before we broke into groups that actually I'd also touch in terms of good transitions, wasn't it? That actually we might think, oh, well, surely good change will be fine. And of course, it is much easier, isn't it, if our reason for change is greater than our reason not to. So, for example, if someone is getting married or someone said, I'm going to move in with my partner, your reason for change is greater than your reason not to. I really want to be with this person. But there can still be transition changes. So if you're used to living in your own place and you're now going to move in with somebody, you have to have changes in the way you operate. You're used to being able to go into the shower whenever you want to. But now, if you've only got one bathroom, oh, you're going in the shower when I want to go in the shower. It's a transition you've got to adjust or get used to that is different. It's a good reason for change, but it can bring some transitions with it that nevertheless still might be quite difficult. And it can be the same for us in work context. This is a really good reason for change. Form 901, people have always talked, takes too long to fill in. We've got Form 902. It's much quicker and it's much easier. There are less questions to answer, and it's all electronic, so it's quicker and you don't have to do any adding up. But yet, it's a good reason for change, but yet the transition, having to learn new ways of doing things, can still be difficult. So what Jacqueline mentioned earlier is that, yes, we can vary in our emotions that Bridges listed, depending on our ethos, depending on the change, depending on whether it's change for good. But it can still involve transition that's different to what we did before. So it comes back again to the thing we did at the beginning, folding our arms one way, folding our arms the other way. Of course, once you get used to it, you can then become this super arm folder like I can now. However, it's that first change, isn't it? Even me, that first change, it was like, oh, hang on, I've got to really think about it. And so that can still be difficult. But nevertheless, the intensity of the emotions that Bridges talks about can vary depending on our situation. Okay, let's move on because we've got lots of other really rich and exciting theories to run through. The next one is Cotter. And this is just helping, again, if you're thinking about making some change. And he talks about these kind of 8 steps broken into 3 parts. He says, first of all, create the climate for change. So sometimes with change, if you think about when the change has been hardest, it's when it's suddenly thrown at you. You suddenly turn up for work and someone says, bosh, this is now happening. What he says, Cotter says, is if you want to make good lasting change, he said, you need to create the climate for it. And he has these 3 parts for the climate. He says, create urgency. So there's this sense of importance as to why we need to make this change. Form a powerful coalition. In other words, work with people to get some impetus and some drive for change, and create a really good vision for this change. Now, a key word again here is why. I'll keep mentioning this to you, and later on in the session, I'll talk about the 5 prompts to persuasive power, and the key part of that is giving your reason why. People buy into a why, they don't buy into a what. They buy into the reason behind it. And it's the key thing is about thinking about what's your reason for this change, not just because I want to do it, but what's your reason behind this change? And then think about what is it in these people that I'm working with that they'll want to buy into that. And what you're doing in terms of a Venn diagram, this is your reason for change, that is their reason for change, and you're trying to find the intersection, the overlap. What is it about the reason for this change that they might buy into? And it's about expressing it then in those terms. Creating a sense of urgency, sometimes the reason for change has to happen because there's a problem. And actually, people will probably quickly pull into change when there is a crisis. And what you tend to find, there's a phrase that says there's no silo thinking in a crisis. And silo thinking is where people work in departments. And this is what we do over here. And we don't do that, but we do this over here. You'll get people pulling together quickly for a crisis because it's really important. And so this urgency, this reason why we really must change this, if you can create that, it creates a good culture for people wanting to engage in the change. This next part is engaging and enable the organization. So he says what is really important then is that you communicate that vision, you empower people for action, you facilitate them, you enable them to be able to make that change too. You provide the resources for them, you provide the kind of training for them so they understand how to do the new thing. So in other words, that, right, we're going to fill in form 902 now, not rather than form 901. You communicate the vision, the reason why. Empowering action is showing them how to fill that form in. It's providing them with the resources that they need to fill that form in. And then where you can, you create quick wins. You can't find easy ways that they can do. You remember I talked about earlier that comfort zone and the golden zone. You find easy little first steps that they can achieve within that. So it might just be, look guys, for this week, I just want you to try on one of them to fill form 902. And what I'm particularly looking for, just make sure you fill in that first section complete. And then for all other forms, you can do 901 this week. And then next week, what I want you to do is to fill in at least 2 of the new forms. So that could be quick wins. All they've got to do is one form this week to see how that worked. And then they can stick back to what they're normally used to as form 901. And just to reassure you, there is not a new form coming called 902. It's just an example. And then the third part is implementing and sustaining change. So it's building on the change and making it stick. And building on the change is about just checking how people are going, giving good examples, showing, look, this is what so-and-so's done with it. This is a little quick win. They've managed to just refine this. And making it stick is about that checking and reminding, praising where you're seeing it work, creating the meerkat moment so that people go, oh, someone's getting praised for doing something, so that's what I must do as well. And he said, that's the process you take people through for successful change. You just turn up tomorrow and tell them they've got to do it. You haven't created the climate and you haven't enabled people by training and supporting them and helping them to make those simple changes and developments through the process. So that's Kotter. Again, if you're planning change, it's important for those. And the other theory, again, so Kotter, Bridges, Nudge, this one I'm about to tell you, are something that you need to know. So when you are doing your project and you are documenting some of your reason for change, we'll talk this at the end, it is about where you can make reference to anything in Kotter. So when you're saying, I really thought about the reason why behind this change, and the reason behind it is this, and link back to, because Kotter says I need to create the right climate, and it created the right climate by, and then if you saw how that helped, you write that down in your kind of example, your documentation about how you manage the project. And if you, for example, I empowered action by showing everyone how to fill in the new form. And I actually provided everyone, I worked with Fred and Barney first, and they then mentored the other members of staff about how to fill in the form. And by doing this, I empowered them to feel more confident about doing the form. I created quick wins by only asking them to fill in one new form in the first week. If you can, link it back to some of this theory, because then you're showing that your reading and your kind of learning has then impacted on the way that you now deliver change. Now, in all honesty, and unfortunately this is being recorded, so people are now going to hear this, but in all honesty, in the future, you won't go, oh, the reason that I'm now going to run this training is I'm empowering action in line with Kotter's theory. You're probably not going to do that. but you probably will get used to the process of some of these key things. But in terms of your portfolio, in terms of showing your project, being able to refer back to some of these are useful and important. So the next one is nudge theory, and Hannah referred a bit to this earlier. She didn't say, oh, we've had a bit of the nudge theory in the way that we transitioned to Mosaic, but actually as I listened to her, that's a little bit about what happened. And so the nudge theory is about, as it says really, it's this little small incremental nudges being just nudged along. Sometimes when we do change, we go, we're currently here and we're going to here, everyone. And the jump seems quite big. Nudge theory just works on, we're just going to try this little bit and we'll try this little bit and we'll try this little bit. And before they know it, we've ended up in a different place because we've nudged people gently towards it. And so you can see here the nudge starts from define the change that you want to happen. Consider your employees. Kind of think about the evidence options that you need. Look at change as a choice. So what is different about nudges? Why don't you just try this? And so you engage them in a choice rather than saying, you need to now do this. So there's a challenge with nudge because, of course, people could go, no, thanks, don't want to do that. I'd rather not. But nudge can particularly work if people are a bit fatigued with change, is what we'll talk about later. Nudge means you listen to the feedback that's coming back from people. Oh yeah, I found that a bit easy, but I found that a bit difficult. And so therefore, where you can, you try and limit some of the obstacles. So you think about the person, what could they find difficult? How could I remove that obstacle, make it less of an obstacle, reduce it? Oh, I know that person finds the computer really difficult and I want them to get used to this new form. So how could I limit the thing around the computer to be difficult? And it might be that you decide to do a paper printout for them first so they get used to the process. It could be that you choose to have a mentor. It could be that you choose to do the form with them first, that you get them to fill it out on paper and then you go on the computer with them and you show them how to do it and then you get them to help you with it and then you get them to do a bit and you support them. And so it's just thinking about little nudges, little gentle movements for them, and you create short-term wins. So the nudge theory works very much with that golden zone that I was talking about earlier. What is it? What one little change, and you're gradually increasing and moving people out from their comfort zones. So nudge won't work with everything because sometimes people have to do it and we have to make that movement. But maybe sometimes it can work, particularly if you've got someone that's is going to find this transition really difficult. It's about gradually nudging or moving them to help them look and see and think about it differently and to be offered choices to do it and engage them in it rather than telling them. But it's thinking about choices that are just into their comfort zone and make it easy to work with. Have you ever been nudged just out of interest? Have you ever been nudged on something? So this nudge theory offered a change. Would you like to try this? And little movements. Or has all of your change been, we're doing this, off you go, and I want you to do it? Has anybody ever been nudged? Just can be yes, no, or we've got a no from Bryony. She's never been nudged. She's always had the big change. Yeah. Think about how might nudge feel. What might nudge feel like for a receiver of change, as you've heard it? Anybody got any thoughts on that? No thoughts at all, Colin. You're blowing our heads with all of this.
I think it'd be a lot more supportive, and the person going through the change just feel a lot more comfortable with it as well, and they won't be some people might get freaked out by the big change, but the gentle nudges, it goes with their pace of being able to change as well. I think the big key to it though is just understanding and chatting and explaining the why the change. And I think that is the main thing. When people understand how it's going to benefit the company, the place, the work environment, and the positive outcomes of it, I think that helps. But religion is just more reassuring, I think, for the person.
It feels safer, and it engages people in it as well. Hannah, you've just taken.
Yeah.
Have you got something to add?
The cutter one feels a bit more like a top-down approach, where the nudge one is a bit more. They're talking to other staff on on the same kind of level, and it's kind of seeing it from the employee's point of view as well. So, because with the other one, it's really, this is the change, it's happening, and we all need to adapt and everything. But this one's a bit more gentler, a bit more employee kind of thoughtful.
Yeah.
I also think as well, as the person going through the change, your opinion feels a lot more valued and like you're part of the process. Whereas if you're just told, right, this is changing, you're doing this now, it's like, oh, okay. Whereas if you're involved in the process, you'll be a lot more inclined to not put resistance, and then also to move along with the change and be more happy about it, and then feel like you're being listened to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it depends what change is happening. For some things, nudge wouldn't be appropriate. For other things, cotter is more appropriate because we have to go there. But if you can, trying nudge can be quite helpful. I've often found blending the two can be really useful because nudge is empowering. So actually, if you can give the grand reason for change, this is where we're heading, but I want us to go there step by step. What could you try this? And engaging people in that and empowering them can be really useful. This theory in some ways links a bit to, have you ever heard the phrase of boiling the frog? It's a rather sick, cruel phrase, really, but it's the principle behind it is they reckon, I've never tried this because I think it's cruel, they reckon if you put a frog in a pan of boiling water, it will jump straight back out. Yeah. But if you put a frog in a pan of cold water and gently heat it, it doesn't jump out, and then poor old frog gets boiled to death. So it's a really sick analogy. However, the principle is if you gradually get used to people to the temperature of change, you don't get this kickback and reaction. And so this is where nudge fits in, really. You're gradually getting people used to the temperature of change. Whereas if you suddenly present change to people, they're likely, like a frog, to bounce straight back out at it. So maybe not the most, politically correct of metaphors, but it is one that's used out there about boiling the frog. It's about just gradually getting people used to something. So something to consider, depending on the change that you need to bring about. And again, if you do any nudging in your project, make reference to it. Make reference to some of these purple ones. So keep this slide as part of just being able to refer back to that in your project, where you can demonstrate that you've used some theory as part of your change. Okay, in the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about change fatigue and leading change. So we're going to whistle through some bits just so you're aware of it, and then the leading change bit we'll spend perhaps slightly more time on. So change fatigue is where you get this general sense of apathy or resignation. And the research they've done shows that 70% of transformation efforts fail due to change fatigue. So being aware of that if you're about to lead some change, if people have been through a lot of change, you need to be aware, because maybe people need to breathe, maybe they need to settle, maybe they need to feel comfort before you push the next bit of change through. This is particularly hard when you're working with a place that has been under a lot of pressure because it's been underperforming. So you'll know, as well as working with businesses, I do work with schools, and I see this particularly where schools have been, in Ofsted terms, given special measures. They're in a real mess. Leadership is poor, and maybe they've had lots of temporary leadership and lots of changes. They're just fed up with the change. Maybe you've worked in a business like that as well, though, where actually it's not been performing well. Various people have come in to try and sort it, and it's not shifted, and people are just fed up with the change. There's a key piece again of information to be aware of. So Prochaska and Di Clemente talk about the cycle of change for individuals. I've just put that also in terms of it can be exactly the same for an organization going through change, that quite often people will pre-contemplate, maybe I should change. Then they begin to really seriously contemplate and think about it, number two. Then they prepare for this change, and then they take action. And they're starting to maintain this new change that they have, but then there's a relapse. And then they fall. Now, they can fall back to probably action, or some people fall off completely, and then much later on, maybe they pick up again, or maybe I should get back to that. So I can see very much for Prochaska and Inclemente, if I look at before I changed my eating habits, I went through, I'll try this diet, I maintained a bit of diet, but then I had a Chelsea bun and fell off the wagon. And then, oh, no, I must not eat my Chelsea bun, I must go back to, and then you go back to that diet again, and then you fall again. And then maybe you go through what they don't put here is maybe a period of fallow where you really have got lost on it. But then you go, no, this isn't right. I need to get back onto it. The Tapscott version I've just put here is just that you can do the same as a team as well. It's those same principles. And maybe we look, oh, we're not happy with how things are working. You plan for the change, you prepare for it, you take action. Things seem to be going all right. And then there's a relapse. You lose focus on keeping an eye whether Form 902 is now being filled in completely, properly, and people slide back to, oh, I couldn't find a 902, so I went back to using Form 901, and you relapse. And then people go, no, we must get back to it. And then you pick up again. And sometimes again, oh, look, we've really fallen off the wagon. We're not using the forms properly. Look, it's causing us difficulties, this, and you fall into that dissatisfaction, that process through again. So this sense for people that quite often, particularly if they have gone through it and relapsed, gone through it and relapsed, gone through it and relapsed, there's this sense of, again, change fatigue. I keep trying and it just doesn't work. And people are just fatigued about the change that's going to come. Some of the signs for change fatigue are listed here. And so, you're seeing people burnout, disengagement, and the orange bit next to it shows some of the behaviors you'll start to see if people are disengaged. For example, they'll be late to work, they'll be early to go. You'll start to spot those things. If people are confused, they'll be rushing things, there'll be a blurring of responsibility. If it's complaints, then you'll see a rise in the complaints. The complaints will become more vocal. And again, that could be an indication in people that they're change fatigue. You could equally see in projects, if you're trying to deliver something, if you're trying to make something happen, and you'll find that you'll be affect things like resources in your delivery. People will be busy elsewhere. There won't be enough materials for you to get this new project started. And what you'll see in change fatigue is that right-hand column. You'll see people generally resisting any form of change very quickly. People also will lack their focus on the operational. They really won't care about whether things are done properly. The morale will be low. And there'll be this sense also that perhaps the people that could really make a difference, those people that can lead change well, get dissatisfied and end up leaving the organisation. Now, you may not see that in your current position. You may have seen it before. You may have seen it in an organisation. But again, it's just being aware. If you see some of these orange bits, and even on the change fatigue, if you see people resisting any kind of change, it may well be that they're change fatigued. So it could be that you just hold fire before this change. You get people comfortable again in routine. You spend some time looking at things working well as part of that process. I won't break into that one. This is the other thing. These are the other things that help you with change fatigue. So if you're trying to introduce something new and people are change fatigued, they'll just see, oh, this is another change where you're going to diss the problem, the things that we did before. If you can, honour the past. Because people go, well, why are we changing? What was wrong with that? And you're saying that was wrong, what we did before. It's about saying, no, it wasn't wrong. It was fine for them. But in our new situation, we need to try this. So you try and honour what happened in the past. You don't dismiss it. You don't say it was rubbish, because at that point it did work. But you need something different now. And so you're trying to build a bridge to why it's important for change for this one. If you can, around goals, be grateful for any accomplishments, and try and help people see this as an improvement culture. So it's not that we have to get it right first time. What you're trying to get them to do is see where we're getting better. This is all about us improving, not about us winning and scoring. It's about this journey. It's the journey. It's this reflection that's important. If you can, measure and celebrate things and take pride, again, in this process of learning. How can we get better? What are we learning here, rather than have we got it right? And then again, that helps people cope with the ups and downs of the journey, because you're taking them through that. And recognize and celebrate success will begin to help people realize that this is achievable. So if you spot any change fatigue, these are things important. You may not have that at the moment, but if you go to run a project, whip these slides out, see what you're seeing, and then try some of these things to help you through it. Right, leading change. We whistled through that bit. This is the last half an hour, and here we're going to have a little game. So you'll need to have your mics on for this one. And apologies for any of you who hate maths. This is a little thing just to help you work this one through. Have any of you played the game of FizzBuzz? Maybe when you were younger. No, okay. So I'll explain FizzBuzz. FizzBuzz is where, if you look at the picture, it actually explains it. We are going to replace the number 3 with the word fizz. And we're going to replace number 5 with the word buzz. Okay? Any number that has 3 as a factor of it gets replaced with fizz. So you can see here it goes 1, 2, fizz, 4, there's 5 is buzz, and then you'll see the number 6 is replaced with fizz, because 6 can be divided by 3. 6 has a factor, or has 3 as a factor. Yeah? And you'll see if you go 7, 8, instead of saying 9, you say fizz. Instead of saying 10, you say buzz, because 10 has 5 as a factor within it. 11, and then 12 would be fizz, 13, 14, and then 15, which has 3 and 5 as a factor of it, you say fizz buzz, because 3 and 5 both go into 15. Okay? Now, for those of you who don't like maths, are now feeling very scared and frightened about this game and this activity, because what you're going to do is you're going to go in order, and we're going to play fizz buzz. So the order you're going to go in is Hannah, Brian, Michael, Hayden, Jacqueline, Gemma, Chelsea. So I'll repeat that again, because it's just the order on my screen, but it won't be the order on your screen, because it's the way it works on Zoom. Hannah, Bryony, Michael, Hayden, Jacqueline, Gemma, Chelsea, and then it will go back to Hannah, Bryony, Michael, Hayden, Jacqueline, Gemma, Chelsea. We're going to run through that a couple of times, all right? And so the idea is that Hannah would start, so she would say the number 1.
1.
Yep. And then Bryony, she would say
2.
yeah. And then Michael would be next, and he would say
Fizz?
fizz, yeah.
Yeah.
And Hayden would be next, and he would say
4.
And then Jacqueline would be next, and she would say
Fizz.
yeah. You all get the idea? Good. And at the moment, what you're doing is you're reading that slide. So I'm cruel and nasty, and so I am going to ask you now to do the fizz buzz. Some of you now have rapidly looked at your pens and writing it down, haven't you? Yeah. And so mics all open for the moment. So we might get a bit of feedback, but hopefully if you say it loud enough, everybody will hear. So off we go. Are we ready? And you'll keep going until I tell you to stop. Steady, steady, go.
1.
2.
Fizz.
4.
Fizz.
I think, is that Chelsea now? Have we lost Chelsea?
That was was it
Oh,
Gemma?
I'm struggling to hear you. Hang on, this is Chelsea. As a lady is talking in the room, I'm at work, so I can't play, I don't think. Okay, so Chelsea can't play. So it goes on to Gemma next then.
Would it be Buzz?
So
Or-
Buzz was Jacqueline, right? So you're now the number 6, which would be
Fizz.
Sid. Yeah, great. So now it goes back to Hannah.
So it would be 7.
Correct.
But, yeah.
7,
Oh, I'm going to be terrible at this.
8,
Is it Fizz Buzz? No.
9, which is not fizz buzz, it's just fizz. Yeah. So Michael's done fizz.
Yeah, sign and collect. I got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Now is it fizz buzz?
It's just it's so we've lost our numbers completely, haven't we now? Yeah. So Michael, you went 9, which was fizz.
I'm
And so
10, aren't I?
you are the number 10, which would be
Buzz.
Buzz.
11.
11. Gemma?
Wait, what number are we on? Sorry.
You're on the number 12, which would
12.
be
Fizz.
fizz, correct. Hannah?
Fizz. 13. What are we on?
13.
So just 13.
Bernard?
14.
Michael?
Buzz.
Fuzz. Again, it is. It's fizz and buzz. You're right. It's fizz buzz. Okay, so you've now got used to that way of doing things, haven't you? But I'm now going to change your position by 2. So this time, Michael is going to start. Hayden will be second. Jacqueline. Chelsea, are you back in the game or not?
Yeah, the lady's left now, but when you explained it at the beginning, she was talking, so I couldn't understand the game and I couldn't put my sound on because you'd have just heard her talking.
Yeah. And so do you know what the game is, or is it still completely bizarre?
Didn't know. I could see you talking about numbers and fizz and buzz, but I didn't get it.
So any number that has 3 as a multiple of it, as a factor within it, is the number we will say fizz. And any number that has 5 that has it as a factor, we will say buzz. And any number that has 3 and 5 that is a factor within it, we say fizz buzz.
Okay.
So this time we're starting with Michael. So Michael will say number 1. Hayden will say number 2. Jacqueline would say 3.
Fizz.
Said she'll say fizz. Chelsea then will be number 4. Gemma would be number 5, but she won't say 5. Instead, she'll say
Buzz.
buzz. And then it'll be Hannah, then it'll be Bryony, and then back to Michael. Okay? Right. Let's see how we can go. Michael, go.
1.
2.
Fizz.
You'll go, Chelsea.
4.
Buzz.
Fizz.
Bryony.
7.
Michael.
8.
Hayden.
Buzz. No, fizz.
Fizz. Yep. Jacqueline.
Fizz.
Yeah, because you're on Jacqueline, wouldn't it? So that would be buzz. Chelsea?
I'm on 11, so 11.
Yeah.
Fizz.
Gemma said
Oh.
fizz. 12. Yeah. Hannah.
Is it fizz? Oh, we're on 12 for fizz.
No,
No?
Gemma was 12 and she did fizz.
Oh, sorry. 13.
Yeah. Bryony.
Yeah.
14.
Michael.
Buzz.
Okay, so the reason for this is not to cause you huge problems with maths, although I probably have done now. It's just reiterated all your feelings about maths. And in fact, clearly you haven't had the experience of fizz buzz as children in your maths lessons. So that's why that's not been traumatized until now. Have a think again about how that experience felt. We've introduced a way of doing things. You are all quite used to counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. But yet that activity was quite difficult. What was difficult about it?
It had lots of layers to it, because it wasn't just counting. It then was using the other element of the maths of the knowing your tables, 3 and the 5 times tables, and then also the memory of it as well, and also remembering the words for it.
Yeah, which one was fizz, which one was buzz? Yeah, and it's a whole new way of counting up to 15. And then we also changed your order. So again, you were used to doing it one way, and maybe had planned out. It's all right, I've written it out. Colin doesn't know this. I've written it out on a piece of paper here. 1, 2, fizz, and so I know which one I'm on, and I put a little arrow to mark where I am, and it's all okay. And then I changed the order, and you had to get used to it again, didn't you? Yeah. So little metaphor, hopefully not too psychologically damaged, and that you're going to cite me in something about I used to like maths until Colin made me do this. Fear of change, methothesiophobia. Which ones kicked in for you during that change of counting to 15? Any of those?
A sense of doubt, doubt that you were going to get it right,
Yep.
and and kind of a fear of of getting it right, really, as well.
Doubt and fear of getting it right. Any other ones that kicked in for anybody? Or did you all feel this sense of doubt? Will I get this wrong? Was there any sense of pain? Will I look a bit silly when I get it wrong? I mean, we know each other well enough, so maybe it didn't feel, maybe it was okay to get that wrong amongst each other here. But for some, actually, when we make that change, there can be this real sense of, I know how to count to 15, but this is more difficult and I doubt how I'm going to do and how will I look. Yeah? So, go on, Jacqueline, you were going to say something?
Sorry. I think some of it, when we do enact a change, I think we have to not hold it that this change must be perfect first time round. We then assess it and think, oh, well, actually, through doing this, majority of this worked, but actually, if we tweak that, then it can be better. But don't put that much pressure that it's got to be 100% right the first time. If it's a new thing that's never been done before, there's going to be elements that probably don't work straight away, or that bit of it doesn't work and you have to re-evaluate it. And that's how the change then becomes effective.
Yes. And so what you're talking about there, Jacqueline, comes from us as leaders, that when we're leading this process of change, it's helping people to understand what's the expectation. So if we talk to people and say, actually, we're going to go through this change and we're going to explore this, we're just going to see how this works. And this is going to be about a process, and we're going to evaluate each day what's worked well, what hasn't. Or you can go in saying, guys, we need to get this right. I want form 902 filled in correctly. We can't have any mistakes. And then what you've got is a pressure of fear. Yeah. And people don't mind this sense of change and transition if you're going to explore it together. So it's very hard sometimes for people to naturally see this as just a moment of exploration. But our role as leaders to help them through that can be crucial. Now, we said earlier the fear of change can be one of those three things. And these three areas can be broken into these kind of areas here. And the blue areas are the ones that people can fear, and the antidote are the ones on the right-hand side. So fear of change won't necessarily be listed under your level 3 stuff. But again, make reference to some of these in your project when you're leading it. What I detected was this from my team, or I thought that they might feel one of the blue ones on the left-hand side, and therefore I did this. Now, generally, if you want successful change, inviting people into the planning can be really powerful, because you empower people to contribute to the change, to feel a sense of control in it rather than it being done to them. So some of these principles can really help your change anyway. Even if you're not seeing the fear of change, it can reduce the chance of them feeling that change. So we said earlier, a sense of surprise can really throw people. But if you plant small seeds, small reveals before it's going to happen, oh, I'm just looking at the way that we do this. What do you think? And you're beginning to plant the little seeds that there might be a change there. We have to use that one carefully. Otherwise, people can over worry or worry about things that don't actually come to fruition. So just utilizing some of these. Are there any there as you read them that you're not quite sure of or you've never heard of before? There's a little test here, because there probably is one, particularly something, a process that you maybe not have heard of before. Or do you know them all? Understand it all? Hannah?
Cantor's Law.
Cantor's Law, good. You spotted the one that I would have expected everyone to go, I've never heard of Cantor's Law before. So Cantor's Law is, it will be all right on the night, effectively. So the area of doubt that people might have is, I think this is going to be more work for me. And of course, when you first start a change or a transition, there often is a lot more work. And there can be the sense of, oh, is this ever going to get better? Is this ever going to work? This just feels like too much change. It's taken me too long to fill in this form, to do this process differently. Cantor's law is it will be okay. It might seem like it will never be right, but it does get right in the end. And that's what Cantor's law is. It particularly works if ever you've been involved in like a play or a performance in a hobby that you may have had, or a school play, if you were ever in one as a child, that when you first do rehearsals, it just seems awful and you think this is never going to be right, but it does get right in the end. And it's just reminding people we're going through this difficult time of learning first, but then it will become easier. So acknowledge to people, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of work at the beginning, but it will then get right in the end. You don't need to quote Cantor's law to them, but you just need to know of it will be okay in the end. We've got this peak at the moment, but then things will settle. Yeah, so people will doubt things like competence. I can't do this. And when we look in a while at Noster, you'll see that's around the key thing around skills. Therefore, overinvest in people, help them, train them, support them, give maybe an overlap period of trying the old way whilst also trying some bits of the new way. If you see people that are resenting this change, consider healing gestures. Look out for them, encourage them. If you know the thing that works for them is plonking a Mars bar or a pile of grapes, depending which healthy option they want, you know, if that a little gift like that makes them feel valued and wanted, then you consider stuff like that to help them through this transition. And the last one, if there is going to be a real threat to the way they're doing it or a threat to them, it's important to be honest, transparent, fast and fair, not let things drag. So actually, if this change does mean a reduction in hours for some people, or it is going to mean maybe some changes in where people work, then you've got to be honest about it and you need to let people know quickly and fairly. Otherwise, what happens is it just drags and people think you're deceiving them. So if there is going to be a real change, like, oh, don't change it so I can't work with Gertrude, but actually this change will mean they can't work with Gertrude, you've got to be honest and quick and fair about it. So those things can help with people who are fearing change. And now comes to this key document I mentioned to you right at the beginning, Noster's model of complex change. I think this is one of the best models to help you deliver change and see how change is going. It's not listed in your level 3 reading material, but I'm including it for you because I have found this one to be brilliant in helping you plan for change and spot where change is going well. So the way this works is, in order for you to have successful change, which is listed in the bottom right purple box, can you see? It says equals change. In order for successful change to happen, you need the 5 elements of vision, skills, incentives, resources, and a clear action plan. So in other words, you need your vision for change. Why are we making this change? What will this change bring about? How will it make a great difference? And you need to be really clear on what that vision for change is. And you need to make sure everybody working with you knows what that vision for change is. You also need to make sure that everybody has the skills to do this change or thinks they have the skill to do this change. And you'll see why I've added both those bits in a minute when we look at that as a gap. You also need to make sure that there are incentives for everyone to make this change. They need to buy into the change. And the reason they'll buy into the change is because they'll see what's in it for them. That sounds a bit selfish, but everyone needs to know why I'm making this change and how it will help me. You also need to provide the resources for change. In other words, if, for example, you want everyone to fill in Form 602 now, you need to provide plenty of Forms 602. They need to be ready. They need to be on the clipboard. They need to be easily accessible. Everybody needs to know where to find them. And also you need a really clear action plan as to how we're going to move from what we're currently doing to when we want it all smooth and operational. Some key dates, some key actions, and who's responsible for making this change. E.g., Jacqueline will print 300 copies of Form 602. Bryony will make sure that the folders all are hanging up by the desk and she will check it each week. And by the end of week 2, we'll have those all ready. Week 3, there will be the training, which Michael will run for everybody on how to fill in Form 602, because Michael devised Form 602. Everyone looks at Michael in a really sharp way at that point. Michael, why did you make Form 602? And so there's a clear plan what's happening. Now, if you have all of those, Noster said you should get successful change. So when you're planning your project, when you're planning your change, what is your vision for this project? What do you want to happen? But most importantly, why do you want it to be this way? And have you made sure that everybody knows that when you explain to everyone? Is everybody skilled in this new change? How, if they're not, will you make sure they are? When you're planning it, what will get people buying into this? Is it just I need to put a Mars bar on each of their desks and tell them, please do this, I'll give you a Mars bar? Or is it that they need to understand how it will help them? What resources do I need? What's my action plan? Have I shared that with everybody so they know what's happening? So that's what you need to plan for. But this also helps you when you're trying to work out when things are going wrong. So you've launched your change, you're running this project. Now, if you see any of the emotions or behaviors on the right-hand side, e.g. confusion, anxiety, resistance, frustration, or people feeling like this is just a treadmill, if you work back along the row, you'll see what's either missing or you need to provide more of, or you need to reiterate, or you need to make clearer in order to get your successful change. So, for example, if you're seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of people really worrying about this change, work your way along the row and you'll see what's missing is skills. So if you've got a lot of anxious people, it's because they don't think they have the skills, or because they don't have the skills. Notice there are two parts to it there. You might look at them and going, why are you worrying about filling in form 602? You're quite capable of filling in a form, but they don't think they have the skills to fill in this form correctly. So it can be that they do have the skills, they just need to be helped to see how they have them. Or it could be they just do not have the skills, and therefore you've got to train and develop and mentor them and coach them in that skill in order to relieve their anxiety, so that you then get them partaking in successful change. If you get resistance, again, work your way along the row and you'll see this time the incentives are missing. They haven't seen what they need to buy into the change. And so it's about thinking, what is it that will help them buy into the change? And if you're not sure, maybe ask them, what is it that will help you to buy into this new way of doing this change, whatever your project, whatever your change is that you're leading? So have a think about a change that you've been through. Did you feel any of the purples on the right-hand side?
Yeah.
Jacqueline did. Michael did. He saw it, and I saw a nod from Michael. I got a nod from Hayden. Hayden, let me start with you then. Which of the purple did you experience?
Frustration.
Frustration. So if you work your way along that, that would suggest that some resources were missing, or your access to those resources was hard or difficult in order for you to do this.
Well, it could be a mixture of frustration and resistance, to be honest.
A mixture of frustration and resistance. So it could be a mixture of the incentive wasn't right for you and the resources weren't easily accessible. Was that the case as you now reflect on it?
I think just more of the incentive, probably, rather than resources, I think would come into play more for my example.
And so you couldn't see the reason for the change, how it would benefit you, how it would be advantageous to make that change.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, you nodded. Which of the purples did you experience?
Probably a bit of anxiety to start with.
Yeah. And was it because you didn't have the skills, or was it because you didn't feel you had the skills to do
probably
it?
More like didn't feel, so like self-doubt sort of thing at the start.
Yeah.
That caused anxiety. In the end, it wasn't, it was unnecessary, but yeah, I think anxiety was probably the main one, I'd say.
Yeah. So there, you did have the skills, but there was this sense at the beginning of, I'm not sure if I've got the skills to do this. So then you're anxious. And often what sits there, exactly as you said, is this sense of self-doubt. And what can sit underneath that is, I'm used to doing it well. I'm used to getting my job feeling okay. But this will mean I don't feel I'm performing, and how will I look? And all those feelings can then come in as part of that. So thank you for sharing that one, Michael. That's really helpful. So again, we can see then what's really important. If someone had then really demonstrated to Michael, shown how it could be done, Michael could then see, oh yeah, I can do that. That explanation and mentoring and showing how it can be done enables people to see more easily then that actually you do have the skills to do this is quite important. Anybody else see any of the purples that were different to either anxiety or, Jacqueline, you said you'd seen one. Were they the same for you? Was it one of those emotions?
Yeah, mine was anxiety and frustration.
Yeah. So that would be skills and resources. So can you look back and think either that you didn't have the skills or didn't think you had?
Well, yeah, what it is I'm working towards promotion. So for duty manager, so I've got 3 months of training to do. And although it's fantastic news, I'm so pleased about it. I do feel anxiety because I haven't got the skills. I haven't done a lot of the things I need to do, a lot of the training courses and opening, closing procedures, everything really. So, and then frustration, although it only happened 5 days ago, is the frustration was in my head, I knew what I need to do when in this 3-month time scale and nothing seemed to be in place, no action plan of training or anything in place.
Yeah.
Now, and after discussion, it's like, yes, it is being put in place. So in my head, I've got what I need to do when to complete everything to the standard needed for 3 months.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations that you've got that opportunity. That's really great for you. But also thank you for just identifying I was feeling the anxiety because I didn't think I had the skills. I've not had that experience before. And then identifying that, actually it was a mixture for you of an action plan and resources available to help you with that. So you were going through that mixture of frustration and anxiety that linked as part of that process. And then, of course, once you're reassured, yes, we are going to put a plan in place for you so that you then can get the resources and the experience that you need that will then help you with the skills. Then, of course, that helps reduce the anxiety. And as soon as you maybe do a shadowing one day to see the lockup procedures or whatever, oh, yes, I can do that. I do have the skills to do that. And therefore, and again, a couple of times when you try it, particularly if you're taken through a process. So again, if we're looking at people having a gap with skills for change, what's called an apprenticing process is really, really helpful here. And that process is I do, you watch first. Yeah. So if I was Jacqueline's manager, then, and she wants, for example, to know how to do the lockup procedure at the end of the day if she's a duty manager, is I go, great, Jacqueline, just follow me and watch me. Look, and I go here and I lock this door and this is the number I put in here and and I model to her. And I do, you watch. And let's go around the following day. Do the same. I do, you watch. The next thing is I do, you help. Right, I'm going to do this door, Jacqueline. Can you lock that door? Yeah, great. The next day, Jacqueline, I'm going to do that door. You do this door. And so that's I do, you help. And then the next part of the process is you do, I help. Right, Jacqueline, you take the lead. I'm going to follow around with you and help you with whatever. So you go, right, Colin, I'm locking this door. I'm locking that door. Colin, could you do that alarm code? I think it's 7891. 7891. Yeah. And so we do that process maybe 1 or 2 times or however many times it's needed for that person. And then the next thing is you do, I watch. So Jacqueline, you do it. I'm not going to help. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to watch so you know I'm here. If you go to miss anything, I'll help you. And you do it. You probably do it all correctly, but if there's one about to miss, I might just say, oh, Jacqueline, is there anything you need to do in that room? And so I do, you do, and I watch, and then you're now ready to do it. So for skills, that apprenticing approach of I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, you do, I watch, and what you're doing is gradually handing it over to that person. That apprenticing approach helps people with their skills because it gives them the scaffolding and support as part of that process. So there's Noster. I hope you'll find it a useful gift for planning your change. I would recommend when you're planning your project that you literally work your way along the red, orange, yellow, green and blue. Make sure you've got all those in place, make sure everybody knows about it, document it. And then when you start to outroll your project, if you spot any of the purple, use this to check, and then you can inject back into the gap that's missing. Okay? So a key part I mentioned as well, which we're just going to literally, well, we've mentioned it several times, your why is what important. People will buy into that. And I mentioned earlier the Venn diagram, your why, their why. Make sure you find the intersection, then you'll get people to engage with you. And the last bit to mention here, I've used this in other sections of the course. A guy called Steve Adams wrote a book called The Center Brain. And he's saying if you really want to engage people in something, these 5 things persuade people to be part of the project. This does mean this is a little bit of nudge here in terms of rather than telling them, the first part is to present what you want to happen as an idea. Oh, I wonder if rather than us using Form 601, if we were to try Form 602, the reason why, and you give the reason why that form might be more advantageous, it's slimmer, it's quicker. If you can, then you then do a contrast. So you say, if we continue to fill in Form 601, this is what it will feel like. This is how long it will take. However, if we were to try Form 602, this is what it does. This is how much quicker it can be once we've got used to using it. And this means we don't then have to add up the totals at the bottom because it does it automatically for us. So you present the contrast. You don't assume they'll know how this is going to be so much better. You say, this is what we currently do with advantages and disadvantages, but this is what it could look like. And if you can, pictorialize, create a picture, almost say to people, so imagine yourself coming in, being able to complete that within 2 minutes, and then you can get more onto this. And so you almost paint the picture for them, what it could look like. And where you can, give emotional connection. Imagine how much happier you'll feel when you complete the form so much quicker. So these are the 5 key points that Steve Adams talks about. So again, if you can, use some of these when you're trying to persuade people. Particularly the why is really important. And if you can, present the contrast. This is what we currently are doing, but this is what it could look like. And when you do that, what that'll do is it'll speed up their possible engagement. They might have questions, of course. You need to listen and answer their questions, but presenting the 2 parts again could get people really engaged in your process. So little top tip to use. And the final bit, just to remind you, we've mentioned this throughout. One of the things you'll have to do is a case study on how you've managed a project. It doesn't have to be huge. It could just be a little way, a little difference, a little change in the way things might happen. And these are the key things. Again, Leah will give you more detail, as will your mentor. It's written in your kind of level 3 kind of PDF handbook thing that you should have as part of that process as well. If you haven't got that, ask Leah or your mentor for it. But the key things, have an overview of the project, outline the steps, the plan, including any risks you took. And then as you outline the project, like I've said today, where you can, list it, link it to some of the theory that we've looked at today on how you lead change and develop things. Explain how you monitored the project as well, how you knew it was going okay. Budget will be a key part as well. And again, online, there's some aspects around how to monitor your finance, how to plan for things as part of the process. You may or may not have a budget as part of the project, but if you do, if there's any costs involved, you need to show how you planned for it and then how you monitor the finance. And if you're in any doubt about what project could I do, talk to your mentor about it, about what you could use. How you followed any policies or procedures that link to Mosaic, and make sure you've got towards the end of it where you did a review. What worked well, what didn't work so well. And to a certain extent, it doesn't matter whether the project succeeded or failed. It's the journey of your project that's important. What have you learned from this? What did work well? What didn't work quite so well? What would you do differently in the future? It's showing that you're a reflective practitioner in the way you lead. Because as somebody, I think it was Jacqueline said earlier, when you first make a change, it won't all go smoothly. Very rarely does. When it does, it's a joy, of course. But if it doesn't, it's not about I have failed. It's about I've learned something here to improve myself for next time. Okay, so also what you may want to do as part of that process is just consider what you might need to change on your site. What bit could you change? What could become a project? And when you do, use Nosta's kind of key questions that are there to ask yourself those questions as you begin to plan it. And that if you use that as your basis for planning your project, you should enable that you do get some successful change, or that most of it is successful. Okay. Right, that's the end of our time. Apologies, we've just overrun by 3 or 4 minutes. Any questions before we kind of close that you want to ask now. Again, if there's any individual that wanted to ask a more specific question, by all means, just hang around at the end. Chelsea?
Again, sorry, I'm at work, so I won't be able to stay on and chat, but do you have a contact number I could give you a call on?
Yes, that should be on your handout, which of course I've been turning pages over all over the place.
Yes, it is, yes.
On the front of that is my
Yeah.
contact number. Yeah, don't try the office number at the moment because unfortunately PlusNet are sorting a problem but making it worse. So you won't get through on the office because our office number is off, but use the mobile. If I don't answer it straight away, it's probably because I'm already running another training session or a coaching session, but by all means, leave a message and then I'll try and get back to you.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Okay, if you need to shoot straight off, Chelsea, then please do. If you've got
Thank you.
any other quick questions before we finish? Anything you want to check?
No, I'm fine. Thank you for today.
Lovely. Well, it's been great to work with you guys again. Look forward to seeing you next week. And next week we'll look at how to lead a meeting, some of which you'll know how to do, but we'll do some of the technicalities that then will be useful for your leader meeting kind of unit as well that you'll need for your course part. Okay.